Late at night, the steady hum of the air conditioner filled the quiet room as I slipped into a deep sleep. My bed was my refuge, a safe place where I could leave the chaos of life behind. But I had no idea that this night would be different. The faint creak of the door opening barely registered in my unconscious mind. I stirred slightly, but didn't wake, unaware of the presence entering my private space. Since marrying into a blended family, I had worked hard to keep life balanced. My stepson, Ethan, had always been respectful and polite. From the beginning, he was quiet and reserved, with a mysterious air that often made me wonder what went on in his mind. Still, I could never have predicted what would happen that night. Ethan's steps were soft but deliberate as he approached the bed. Something woke me, a subtle change in the atmosphere, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. My eyes fluttered open to find him standing there, his face partially hidden in the dim light. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. His presence felt both unexpected and strangely intense. "Ethan, is everything okay?" I asked, my voice rough with sleep. He hesitated, as though searching for words he couldn't quite form. "I couldn't sleep," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around me. "You should go back to bed. It's late." But instead of leaving, he stepped closer. His eyes met mine, and I couldn't decipher the emotion in his gaze. Was it curiosity, longing, or something else entirely? The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. My heart raced, though I couldn't explain why. "Ethan," I began, trying to regain control of the situation. "You shouldn't be here." Before I could say more, he cut me off. "I just needed to talk to someone." "To you." His voice wavered, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of vulnerability in his expression. My initial alarm softened as I reminded myself he was still young, navigating his own emotions in a complex family dynamic. I gestured toward the chair by the window. "Sit there," I said, hoping to create some space. But instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't think I've ever told you this," he began quietly, "but you've been so kind to me, more than anyone else ever has." His words caught me off guard, and I wasn't sure how to respond. "Ethan, you're family now. It's what I'm supposed to do," I said gently. He looked up, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. "It's more than that," he said. "You make me feel like I matter." The honesty in his voice stirred something within me, something I wasn't prepared for. I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to offer comfort while keeping clear boundaries. "You do matter," I said softly. "You always will." The silence that followed was thick, the walls of the room seeming to close in. Ethan's hand brushed against mine, lingering for just a moment too long. Every instinct I had screamed at me to pull away, to reestablish the boundaries, but I stayed frozen, his touch warm and magnetic. "I've never felt this way before," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling as I tried to find the right words to de-escalate the situation. But before I could continue, he leaned in, his proximity sending a wave of conflicting emotions through me. Shock, confusion, and something I couldn't name. I knew it was wrong, but his closeness made it hard to think clearly. Please, he whispered, his tone pleading. Just listen to me. I placed a hand on his chest, gently creating a barrier between us. Ethan, we can't. This isn't right. He pulled back slightly, his expression a mixture of frustration and pain. I know, he said, running a hand through his hair. I can't help how I feel. My heart ached for him, for the confusion and longing he clearly didn't know how to handle. Standing, I put distance between us and took a deep breath to steady myself. We need boundaries, I said firmly, though my voice shook. You're young and emotions can be confusing, but this can't happen. It's not fair to either of us. Ethan nodded, though his eyes revealed his struggle to accept my words. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It's okay, I replied, softening my tone. But you need to understand. Some feelings are better left unsaid. He stood, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the heavy weight of what had just happened. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, replaying the encounter in my mind. Though nothing had truly happened, the boundaries of our family had been tested in a way that left me shaken. I knew we both had to process our feelings and find a way to move forward separately. The days that followed were tense, but manageable. Ethan kept his distance, and I made a conscious effort to reinforce the familial dynamic, hoping to reestablish the stability we both needed. We needed to move forward, and gradually the heavy tension began to dissipate, leaving behind a valuable lesson neither of us would forget. Some connections are best left untouched, no matter how strong the temptation might feel in the moment. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the memory of that night lingered at the edges of my thoughts, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I couldn't stop thinking about the expression in Ethan's eyes. So raw, so vulnerable, overflowing with emotions he clearly didn't know how to navigate. It wasn't just his struggle, it had become mine as well. My priority became handling this delicate situation without causing cracks in our family. At first, Ethan kept his distance, barely making eye contact during meals or casual conversations. I gave him space, recognizing that he needed time to process everything, but I couldn't help worrying. Was he okay? Did he feel ashamed? Misunderstood? I battled with the urge to sit him down and talk it through, but I knew I had to be cautious. One wrong step could make everything worse. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner, Ethan walked in. He lingered in the doorway, his hands buried in his pockets. The tension was unmistakable, but I chose to act as though everything was normal. If he wanted to talk, I would wait for him to initiate. Need something? I asked, glancing over my shoulder. He hesitated before responding. Just wanted some water. I nodded and continued chopping vegetables, pretending not to notice how long he stayed, even after filling his glass. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet but steady. I paused, setting the knife down and turning to face him. His face was etched with sincerity. "You don't need to apologize, Ethan," I said gently, "but I appreciate it." He took a deep breath, his fingers gripping the counter tightly. I didn't mean to make things weird between us. I just, I don't know what I was thinking that night." "You were overwhelmed," I replied, choosing my words carefully, "and maybe a little confused. It's okay to have feelings you don't fully understand. What matters is how you handle them moving forward." He nodded slowly, his gaze falling to the floor. "I'm trying. I really am." "I know," I said, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "And I'm here if you ever need to talk about anything, but we have to keep things in perspective, okay? This family matters, and I don't want anything to put that at risk." "I get it," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I just want things to go back to normal." His mouth going gently between his teeth, smiling graciously. "Second time? By remember that like muscles all night, all together." "Me too," I admitted. "And they will. It just takes time." From that moment, we both worked to rebuild the foundation of our relationship. Ethan made a conscious effort to connect more with the family, and I made sure to treat him the way I always had, with kindness and firmness, while keeping clear boundaries in place. Slowly but surely, the tension began to ease. One afternoon, as we sat with the rest of the family watching a movie, Ethan caught my eye and smiled. It was a genuine, unguarded smile, free of the burdens we had carried. Relief washed over me. It was a sign that we were heading in the right direction, that the fragile bond we had nearly broken was starting to heal. In time, the memory of that night faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of everyday life. Ethan grew more confident and at ease, and I couldn't help feeling a quiet pride as I watched him manage his emotions with growing maturity and grace. Our family was far from perfect, but we were learning, growing, and creating something stronger. Looking back, I realized that night had been a turning point, not just for Ethan, but for me as well. It taught me the value of patience, empathy, and the importance of setting firm boundaries. It reminded me that love, in all its forms, is often complicated, but it's also what binds us together, even in the hardest moments. If my story resonated with you in any way, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. I'll be sharing more experiences like this, stories of resilience, healing, and finding hope in life's darkest times. Thank you for listening.